Because of his knowledge and expertise, he's one of the reasons why FPA specializes in investment advisors, CPA, and manufacturer distributor vertical markets. He's active in the industry and speaks at events and has a number of articles published. Now let me give you a little background about FPA. We've been in business for over 21 years. We currently have about 25 employees. They're all full-time staff. We don't outsource anything to third parties. We have our own dedicated network operations center where we run our clients' networks. And one of our mantras is business before technology. To us, this means we focus on the business aspects and the value proposition technology brings to our clients' businesses. It's not about technology for technology's sake. A lot of companies have core values that pretty much are run-of-the-mill. We've seen companies with integrity, honesty, fast, etc., but ours are a little bit different. We really believe in our core values as our primary one is simple, which is to take care of our clients. We believe that if we're going to do this, everything else is going to fall into place. And lastly, we focus on your IT, so you can focus on your business. This may seem like a marketing tagline, but we really do approach everything this way. We work with a number of clients in the greater Los Angeles area. We have clients we've opened our doors with 22 years ago, as well as clients that we've gotten last week. We specialize in implementing and supporting technology for small to mid-sized businesses. Interesting enough, beyond our technical expertise, systems, processes, and the how we do what we do, we believe our ability to develop long-term and meaningful relationships with our clients makes all the difference when it comes to our clients' success with technology. And at this point, let me turn it over to Craig Pollock to get us going.
Great, thanks, Nadia. That was a great intro. Hopefully I can live up to all those great words you said. So this is our webinar, Best Practices to Reduce Your Cyber Risk. And I think today what we're going to try to do is make it as informative and hopefully two-way if we can, but informative as possible. And you know, I'll tell you to start off with, we're just looking at this as an informational, educational webinar. Hopefully we can share our knowledge and expertise and pose some thoughts out there for you guys to consider and think about how you're doing what you're doing. Obviously, that's one of the things that Nadia spoke about FPA. But seriously, speaking about how you're doing what you're doing from the technology perspective, and specifically how it relates to security, how it relates to data breaches, how it relates to your ultimately liability and the ongoing feasibility of your business. So today what we're hoping to cover includes what's the difference between an intrusion and a data breach. Start out really simple. The key threats to your businesses, the 7 steps needed to ensure you're prepared for a data breach, the foundations for secure, compliant, and effective approach to security, the shocking misunderstanding most business owners have about their current exposure to data leakage, and what is cyber liability insurance and why you may need it. So that's what we're hoping to cover today. Hopefully we'll get a lot of information out to you, and hopefully this is a value proposition that'll be beneficial to you guys. So let's start off at the very beginning here and think about what is the difference between an intrusion and a data breach. Well, conceptually, a data breach is an incident which sensitive, protected, or confidential data has potentially been viewed, stolen, or used by an individual unauthorized to do so. Basically what it means is an intrusion is somebody has penetrated your network, however that might be, or penetrated your secure access to your information. It might be from virtually over the internet. It might be somebody looking through your trash. It might be somebody putting in a flash drive and stealing something. So an intrusion is just somebody getting in, whereas a data breach is actually somebody seeing information. And if you notice, it's not necessarily that they've taken it, but that they've seen it. So viewed, stolen, or used. So it's a significant difference between what an intrusion is and what a data breach is. And that's kind of the starting point for this whole concept. So that being said, let's talk about a couple different things about this and talk about like kind of the types of intrusions and the types of data breaches and what this all kind of looks like. So obviously the first thing that people think about is hacking. And you know, there's actually what's called random, and then there's specific, meaning random hacking involves just looking for open ports. Nobody's specifically targeting your business, but they're just looking for the easiest prey and looking to see, you know, based on, is the door open, can I get in, and then if I can get in, what can I get to? So, you know, just because you think you may not be targeted doesn't necessarily mean that you may not ultimately get hacked. Virus and malware. So a big thing these days is above and beyond just taking over your computer or ruining your computer or making it inoperable, but actually creating back doors that people can then get into and do things with your information. Cyber terrorism. This is a really hot topic out there these days. And again, these are all just different sorts of opportunities, tactics, ways that, you know, you might be exposed that you might otherwise not think that really you have the risk around. You know, well, who's going to attack me? You know, I'm just this little business. Well, there's different ways that that happens, and there's different reasons that happens, whether or not it's attacking your business, whether or not it's using your resources to go attack somebody else's business, whether it's taking the information that you might have and then leveraging that to a second, third, fourth party, and the next thing you know, they're able to get into some larger account, whether it's your hosting account, whether it's your cloud account, whether it's you know, third-party vendor that you're working with. Any of that sort of thing can be extrapolated out. So you may be the starting point, whereas you're not necessarily the target. There's employees, you know, unintended people who are taking things and don't realize that they are, and rogue employees, people that are leaving or unhappy and looking for ways to get back at your business. On top of that, there's the virtual concept, i.e. your network, your infrastructure, both remote and on-premise, as well as physical, meaning, you know, paper files, scan files, PDFs, copying things to flash drives, copying things off to tablets. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that employees can access this information. And then again, you have third-party vendors, you know, custodians that you work with. For our investment advisor clients, if you're transferring information back and forth, do you have that account information somewhere on your network? Do you have the login and username for custodial information? For your cloud hosting, if your email's hosted out there, are your passwords secure to get into the your cloud-hosted information? Same thing with web hosts. You know, if you have a website and that's hosted someplace, do you have information about how people can get into that? And then, you know, the physical attributes, lost or stolen computers, tablets, you know, and laptops. What are you doing about reducing your risk around that? There's the physical aspect. And then lastly, another concept around all of this is just the overriding understanding of data. And a lot of times people think, well, gee, I don't really have to worry about cyber liability, or my cyber liability risk is pretty minimized because we don't, we're not HIPAA compliant, we're not in the healthcare industry, or we don't have people's personal information. But there's more to it than just that. And the reality is when you talk about people, customers' personal information, you may not be holding their credit card information, but if you have account numbers, you're responsible for that. If you have their social security numbers, you're responsible for that. You're responsible for your employees' information, let alone, you know, intellectual property. So there's a lot of different concepts around this whole intrusion and data breach and cyber liability topic. And so I think it's really important that you think about these things more than just, you know, the mechanisms. So a lot of this is around the data. So that being said, wanted to step back and talk a little bit here about the concept of data security breach reporting. And what I mean by that is, different states have different laws about how you need to report if you've been breached. And so the first one to talk about, and I'll read it really quickly, but California law requires a business or state agency to notify any California resident whose unencrypted personal information was acquired or reasonably believed to have been acquired by an unauthorized person. So literally what that means is if you have somebody's information on your network and it's unencrypted, and personal information could mean their, like I said, doesn't necessarily mean their credit card information. It could mean their social security number. It could be their address. It could be personal information from an HR perspective, whether it's your customer or your employee or any of that. And if you notice also, it doesn't have to be breached. It doesn't necessarily have to mean somebody's taken this data and done something with it. If you believe that somebody may have done something with it, then you need to notify those people. That's a huge issue, I think, in terms of for any service industry. I know it would be for us. I know it would be for investment counsel clients, for CPAs, any professional services industry. I think that this is a huge thing because with us, it's all about trust. It's all about the trust in the relationship. And if that were breached, I think that would be a huge dent into people's reputations. So the other portion of this is any person or business that is required to issue a security breach notification to more than 500 residents. That means that if you have a list of more than 500 of your customers, and you may think that that list got breached or your network got breached and the accessibility to that list may have been compromised, then you have to notify the Attorney General of the state of California. And this is just California's laws. There are different laws out there for all different states. And so our law specifically says California residents. There are other laws that say for their specific state residents. I know that Massachusetts laws are pretty stringent in this fashion. I think it's a lot less than 500 residents, and I think you need to notify the people who have been impacted as well as the state within 5 days. And so if you're doing any business with people who live in Massachusetts or have a home in Massachusetts, again, perhaps for our investment advisors or CPAs, if you're working with people who have different residencies in different states, not only are you responsible based on our state's laws, but you may also be held liable for the other state's laws. So this is a pretty kind of sticky situation and all-encompassing situation, and that's why we're kind of bringing it to light, because it's a pretty important perspective on your business. So speaking of perspective, let's talk a little bit and give you some examples of kind of what's going on out there these days. So here's, based on some information that's out there, most data breach victims fall prey because they were found to possess exploitable weaknesses rather than because they were pre-identified for attack. What does that mean? That means that it doesn't matter whether you think that your information is valuable or not. It's actually more based on whether it's accessible or not. And that's how you get attacked. Speaking of lost laptops, 46% of lost laptops contain confidential data. Only 30% of those were encrypted. So that means the other 70%, which weren't encrypted, means you need to notify all of your customers who may have had information and all of your employees who may have had information on that laptop that this had taken place. The average value of a lost laptop is almost $50,000, and this number represents 80% of the total cost of the laptop. Again, encryption on average can reduce this cost by more than $20,000. So encryption is a huge thing here. Thinking of that, over 130 data breaches were voluntarily reported to the California State Attorney General last year. So this puts some of what I'm talking about into perspective. continuing on, 65% of employees who commit insider intellectual property theft have already accepted positions with a competing company. So what this means is when you have employees who are leaving, something could be going on that you have no idea about. So another thing to think about is 75% of insiders stole material that they were authorized to access. So if you think about that, it's again, there might be some things here that you can physically not control. And so that kind of is why some other measures need to be taken into account. And that's kind of why we're talking a little bit beyond just data breaches, but cyber risk as well as cyber liability. 54% of insider intellectual property thieves use a network. And through 2016, the financial impact of crime will grow 10% a year. So again, pretty important things to be thinking about. And lastly, only 5 of those 130 breaches required notification were for more than 100,000 people that were breached, meaning that while the mega breaches make for great headlines, they're not the common ones, and they're not what we normally see out there. More than half of all reported data breaches were the result of deliberate intrusions. And the most standout finding was that 1.4 people would not have had their information put at risk if encryption had been used. So this encryption concept is a huge concept that we really like to hit home about. Because one, you don't even have to report it if you had it encrypted. And two, if you had it encrypted, that obviously reduces your liability out there. So you're doing your due diligence and whatever you can to protect your information. And that's kind of the most important thing these days. So let's talk a little bit about cyber risk. But before we do, I'm going to throw a poll up there for you and try to get a sense of what you guys are thinking and where you're at right now. So this first poll, which best describes your cybersecurity status? I know our network security is as tight as it can be. We haven't had a network security scan in the last year, and I have no idea if we're secure or not. So tell me where you think you stand, and we'll try to get some numbers here. This is where we need, again, the music from Jeopardy. So I can get you guys to answer this. Okay. We're getting some results. Good stuff so far. Okay, another 10 seconds, let's say. 10 seconds, everybody there? If you haven't voted, please respond. And 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So I'm going to close the polling. And so this is what we found out. So interesting, 2/3 say your network is as tight as it can be, and 1/3 is saying you have no idea if you're secure or not. Interesting that nobody's replied that you haven't had a network scan in the last year. And so that I think the results might go to the level of interest that we have here, that people who take security seriously are involved and want to learn more, and that's kind of the reason that you're on the webinar. And the other 33% are looking to do something about it. So I think that's really good information. So let's continue on at this point. We'll talk about some cyber risk. So what do these things look like? What are your risks, and what does that mean? So first off, there's just the concept of data breach, and that's what we talked about, whether it's your customer data, employee data, intellectual property, a loss of data, if somebody's able to take some information without you knowing it, and this all goes back to backup and redundancy and other things that go about protecting your information. Loss of computing resources. We actually saw this years ago where a client got compromised, and it wasn't so much about the data that they were taking as much as what they were doing was storing video files and serving up the video files and using the servers as a shared resource. So they were dragging the network down, basically using their network as a free repository, free internet to serve up BitTorrent movies. And so that was a huge impact to their network performance. The misuse of computing resources and people using things that they're not supposed to be doing. Copyright infringement. And again, a lot of people don't think about this from a business perspective, is that you might have information, you might post something on a website, you might put up a picture on a website and not even realize that there's copyright infringement. And the fact that it's quote-unquote cyber puts it in a different realm. And literally, you may not be covered in your standard general liability insurance, and you may not be covered in your errors and omissions insurance, that because of this cyber concept, insurance companies are looking at liability differently these days. And you may not realize that you post a picture on your website that you aren't authorized to do, and you could get sued for that and not have any protection in your insurance. And going further, there's your liability around social media, and what your liability may be for employees posting things for you, and you have people who are posting on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, and they're posting about your company. You're responsible for that. And further, and you may not even realize this, but for employees who are posting things at work, you may be responsible for that as well. So if somebody's on the clock and says something negatively online about something completely unrelated to your business, but they did it through your internet connection, through your computers, through the browser that's on their desktop that you're giving them to do your work, if they do something like that and they are held liable, you may be held liable as well because you're giving them the opportunity and the ability to do that. So there's some serious liability issues here that people don't realize are not covered under your regular insurance policies. And believe me, I'm no insurance guru and no insurance agent, but we've done a lot of work with cyber liability insurance over the years, and this is a big hole that people don't really realize they're at risk at. So ultimately, what does that mean? It means that the impact with your outright costs, the impact what it would be when you need to respond and deal with it, the impact in terms of your reputation and future earnings. So again, this cyber risk really can put businesses in a certain position, in a compromised position. So a recent poll was taken across IT service providers, and I just kind of wanted to share this with you, that have you or one of your clients experienced one or more of the following cyber-related attacks, breaches, and/or data-related losses? And so this kind of breaks it up so that you get a sense of what's going on out there in the world. So if you look at this, lost or stolen devices or even paper makes up the largest aspect of what the attack or breach might have been. So losing a laptop, losing a tablet, losing files that you didn't even realize were open and available for people, i.e. how your email is managed. Network breach comes in second at about, almost 25%. So 25% of some sort of attack, breach, or loss is based on a network breach. So these are all things that I think, relatively speaking, can be controlled and mitigated at a somewhat reasonable cost as compared to the cost of what your liability would be otherwise. So further, what steps have you and your clients typically taken to mitigate these risks? And again, the biggest thing is if you look at network security measures, physical security measures, device security measures, those are, more than 50%, probably 60% of what's going on in terms of a response are around the network, around the devices, and around physical security. And I think the big takeaway from all of this is that there are fairly meaningful things that you can do. And while cyber liability insurance only plays, a piece of this, I really think that the biggest piece is really, what we call an end-to-end security approach. And so, what does all this mean and what should you do about it? And what I was just talking about is an end-to-end security approach. And what that means to us is really thinking about security as an overall concept and not just one little thing. Oh, we have a firewall, so we're secure. Oh, we have network permission, so we're secure. It's really more of a culture and a company culture and an approach. So what does that really look like? Well, it means having a pretty solid and strong computer use policy that has a social media component to it, and you have your policies written down, and everybody in the company knows what those are. You have a pretty strong mobile device management approach. You have an approach to physical security. I don't know how many times we've gone into clients and the server is into the break room, wide open to anybody. Anybody has access to their computers. Anybody has access to tablets. People are using GoToMyPC whenever they want. They're doing it without a VPN. They're doing it without any sort of security. And people, I think it comes back to approach and concept and culture, whether or not you take security seriously or not. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be uber overly crazy about it, but just taking a serious approach is probably a leg up on 98% of the companies out there that aren't really approaching IT this way. So ensuring your network is secure, again, both from internal and external vulnerabilities, and encrypting your data. Again, not everybody needs to do this, but if you have any sort of information about your customers or your employees, make sure that file is encrypted. Make sure that file is security password protected. And then lastly, along with an end-to-end security approach, so from the highest level, it really feels like, there are two things that should be done. Implement an end-to-end security approach and implement some sort of cyber liability insurance to protect you. One is proactive, implement an end-to-end security approach and doing whatever you can to at least show that you're doing your due diligence and addressing these opportunities for failure. And two, protecting your business purely from a business perspective of what the cost might be if you do get hit with one of these situations. So before we go on to the next one, I'm going to take another quick little poll. And this one, again, if I can get everybody who's listening but not quite paying attention, if I can get you guys to join in real quickly. Which best describes your current approach to cyber liability insurance? We currently have a cyber liability policy, or we're currently evaluating a cyber liability policy, or we don't have, nor are we looking at one. So let's see what we have going on here. keep forgetting the Jeopardy. Jeopardy theme song. Okay, everybody, Alt-Tab back over to us. For all of you who are doing work at the same time, multitasking. I know that can be done. Believe me, I'm as guilty as anybody of attending webinars and multitasking on something else at the same time. So we'll do another 5 seconds and then close down this poll. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 2. Okay, here we go. So here's what we have. Clearly, again, I think the poll kind of reflects where your mindset is, what our visitors and our attendees are taking a pretty serious approach to security, which I love to see. I think that's a great thing. And there's some who are currently evaluating and some who aren't thinking about it at all. So I think it, again, it runs the gamut, but I think this goes to possibly this being our first webinar, and so on the subject, and we're getting more people who already kind of have their ducks in a row and are attending and maybe looking to see if they have everything addressed, looking to make sure that there aren't any holes or learning a little bit more, but I think that that's probably what this kind of reflects. So let's continue on here. I think we're moving through the stuff, and I think we're rounding the curve here. So, so what does it mean to be secure? Well, to start off with, you've had an intrusion vulnerability scan. You're managing your firewall on an active, proactive basis. You have some sort of physical security around your servers, your computers, your laptops, things that are going out there. You have what necessarily virtual security in place in terms of permission management around your files and your folders, controlling it through group policy objects, implementing VPNs so that nothing's being done without a secure, from a remote access standpoint, nothing's being done without a secure connection. You have some sort of mobile device management in place, and you're managing your devices. They're not just out there. You do have some form of data encryption where needed, and you've addressed third-party hosts and how you store your information and what you're storing on your third-party hosts and how that's all controlled. So that's really, at the highest level, what should be addressed from a security approach. So if this doesn't get addressed, and if you do have a data breach, what are the things that you can be doing to prevent the breach in the first place? Well, start off with identifying all sensitive data, and that includes everything at your company as well as your custodians and storage locations and other third-party vendors. Ensure compliance with state and federal regulatory requirements, whether that's SEC or FINRA or California Society of CPAs or HIPAA compliance, and regularly review and update your company's written information security policies. Again, ensure your vendors are compliant. This is a huge area that, especially for investment advisors who have custodians and other third parties handling their clients' information, that's a big issue. And lastly, conduct periodic data security assessments. So, that's one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is making sure that our clients understand that IT management, security, all of the above is an ongoing thing. It's not something that you do once and then go, okay, I'm secure. It's something that has to be done on an ongoing basis. So once you secure yourself, you have to make sure that you stay secure, whether it's through patches and updates and firmware updates and retesting, and because things happen over time, whether it's new software gets released, people learn new vulnerabilities, hackers get smarter, software gets compromised, all of that needs to be managed. So that's really the thing, is an ongoing fight. So what does it mean in terms of the impact, and what could it mean to your business? So first off, any sort of thing that we're talking about happens, an intrusion, a data breach, some sort of loss, some sort of cyber risk that you now could have happen to you. First thing is a loss of computing resources, and that was my example of the video company, the video hackers who took over a client's network. Accessibility to your information. If your information gets stolen, they might not just copy it, they might damage it or take it away. So do you have backups in place? What is the cost to respond? If something major happens, if you have a data breach and you need to notify clients, what is that going to look like? What, you need to let them know. You might have to issue a press release. You might have to deal with legal costs, damage control. So there's all sorts of different costs associated with that. There might be costs to somebody hacks in and downs your server, blue screens your server and wipes out everything. What are the costs to rebuild that? And do you have what it takes to rebuild that? And can you afford to survive the downtime that might impact you? Above all of that is the damaged reputation, and that's what I alluded to earlier. Being a trusted advisor is what could happen if you got compromised. What could happen to your reputation? What does that mean to your clients? Does that mean your business, would there be a loss of revenue? And God forbid, the last thing to think about is could there be a complete business loss? And, the thing is the cyber risk and cyber liability is really a whole new area that without the proper proactive things in place, and that's what I meant by the end-to-end protection, and the prophylactic things in place, like cyber liability insurance, we really are putting our businesses at a significant risk. So all of that said, and we can talk about all we can do up front and all the things that we can do to protect ourselves, but given all of that, we still get a data breach, something still happens. Why cyber liability insurance? Well, what they say is because it's not if, but when. And earlier I mentioned that, cyber liability insurance now is kind of covering, and it's become so cost effective that it's covering these things that your general liability and your standard errors and omissions that normally a number of our trusted advisors, professional service firms have policies. It still doesn't cover that. So it may cover our actions, but it may not cover our actions in the cyber world. So those are all things that you should look at and talk to your insurance agent about and see how you're covered. But some things to think about is what's covered in a cyber liability policy. So first off, there are things like the loss of digital assets. So losses you incur as a direct result of damage, corruption, distortion, destruction of electronic data. So that might not be covered in your standard policies. Non-physical business interruption and extra expense. So the things that don't physically interrupt you but still interrupt you, you lose your server, you lose information, you lose key employee information, you have to fight a lawsuit. Keeping your business running might not be covered from a cyber attack. And attack, I'm using the word loosely, but anything that's cyber related. Security event costs. So, your own direct costs for a privacy breach, meaning reimbursement for security event costs, notifying, computer forensics, credit protection services, all the things that you then have to address to tighten things up and deal with, that's going to be out of your pocket and won't be covered. Same thing with network security and privacy liability coverage. So if you have to pay out damages or claims that are based on a breach or based on responsible that even you personally, your business didn't do, but might be your outsourced third-party vendors or employees caused, that's not going to be covered. So it's interesting stuff here of what this cyber liability policy covers that standard insurance does not cover. And I think most, when we bring this to light and clients meet with their insurance agents or clients meet with our cyber insurance agents, they're really surprised to find what holes are in their policies that they didn't realize would not be covered. So all of that being said, some questions to ask yourselves. So what's your exposure to all of these? I mean, if you feel that your exposure is not that high, then obviously it doesn't make sense to add that cyber liability policy. But, to continue on with some questions to ask to help you consider whether or not it makes sense to address your security issues and also to address, your liability and insurance approach. Are you meeting your industry-specific compliance needs? Are you doing everything you can to limit your risks? Because one of the issues is not necessarily that you protected yourselves, because, again, it might be not an if but a when, but did you show enough due diligence that you had the right intentions and you were doing what you needed to do? So are you doing things about it? If you're doing things about it, not only does that reduce your policy fee, but it also reduces your ongoing liability later on. Are you doing everything you can to protect your customer and your employees' information? What would you do if you were breached? Do you even have an action plan or an action item? How quickly would you know if you were breached? And again, that goes to a certain level of liability, because if you don't know and something happens with that data and then you find out after the fact, you could be significantly more liable or liable for greater damages than if you just get breached and you notify people immediately. So, the last question to ask yourself is, could your business survive a data breach without cyber liability insurance? And we're not here to sell you. Believe me, I'm not an insurance guy, and we're not here to sell insurance. But we are here to bring these points to light and talk to our clients and hopefully help our clients better protect their businesses and think about these issues that, are above and beyond just your standard sort of, tech issues. As our trusted advisor to our clients, we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we possibly can to help our clients protect their businesses, grow their businesses, and improve their profitability. And none of that can happen if you're assuming too much risk. So this is really, from an educational perspective, just trying to share some best practices, some information, being able to show you and help educate what's going on out there. So all of that being said, got two more slides, and then I think we're gonna wrap it up here. So first off, what are the foundations of a cyber risk approach? One, be realistic. You don't have to jump on this and start going crazy and lock down everything that you possibly can. But I think it is important to implement a culture that does take security seriously. Do implement a strong computer use policy. Centralize, if you're not already doing that, centralize control of your IT resources. Leverage your IT department in this. Bring them into the fold. Obviously, I talked about it earlier. This is an ongoing basis, so perform security scans on a recurring basis, over and over and over again. Maybe every 6 months, maybe every year. Depends on what your information is, how many endpoints, how many employees, what your turnover is like, all that sort of stuff, goes into how often that should happen, but it should be a recurring thing. And then spread the word about your progress. Use this to leverage as a public relations, a PR way to showcase that you're on top of this and that you take your clients and your employees' information seriously and use it as a positive rather than a negative. And like I said, it reiterates, that it's an ongoing process. And then understand that it may change over time. And I think those are, some of the big takeaways here today. So all of that being said, the last thing that I'd like to throw out here is to give you guys a sense. All that being said, Hopefully we've educated, shared some knowledge. What do we do? And what are we doing for our clients, and how do we approach cybersecurity? So, you know, again, at the highest level, we provide an end-to-end approach to managing computer resources. So we inventory and track all devices. We know what's going on with everything that our clients are using. We securely manage and reset passwords on a recurring basis. We do this with firewalls. We do this with switches. We do this with end users, administrator passwords. It's an ongoing thing. So as a client of FPA, this is what we do. We make sure that we tighten things up for you. We centrally manage antivirus and anti-malware. One of the big things that we do is we monitor for intrusions. So this comes back to that concept of how quickly would you know that you've been breached. Well, for our clients, they're going to know. And most of the time, all of the time, we haven't had an intrusion. For our clients that we're managing and for our clients that we're monitoring, this doesn't happen. Why? Because as soon as we start seeing traffic, as soon as we start seeing any sort of you know, questionable activity, our network operations center here is on it, and you know, this doesn't happen. So for our managed service clients, this is one of the added benefits of us managing their network is these things just don't happen. And then lastly, we provide guidance on computer use policy and how to kind of set that policy and provide, you know, a way to help kind of develop that culture that we talked about earlier. The second thing that we do is we do offer a security review project, or SRP, as we like to call it. And that pretty much, you know, includes vulnerability scans, physical exposure reviews, PCI compliance if need be. And this is, you know, for our initial onboarding, we normally do a technology review project. But we also offer what's called our security review project and really go drill down deep into what the vulnerabilities are for our clients. So that's something that we offer. And lastly, we partner with cyber insurance carriers. So we have insurance carriers that are specialists in cyber insurance, and we work with them on, you know, an ongoing basis, and are able to provide, you know, resources to our clients who wouldn't otherwise have these specialized resources. So if any of this sort of stuff interests you and you'd like to talk further, certainly we're available. But I think at this point I'm going to turn it back over to Nadia for some housekeeping. And if you have any questions, please raise your hands and let us know, and we'll go from there. But
so thank you for attending. For more information, you can check out our website at www.fpainc.com, or to evaluate your current cybersecurity situation, please give us a call. Let us know if you have any further questions, or if you'd like to talk to Craig further about your specific cybersecurity situation. In addition, we'd like to remind you that we're having a webinar coming up next month where we'll be covering the cloud. So look for that invite coming soon. And thanks again. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.